Glad to have y'all back tonight. I hope everybody liked the evening sermon this morning. Had a discussion on his sermon, I guess, tonight. So, the first Psalm is going to be 27. We'll use the book. To God be the glory, great things He hath done. So loved He the world that He gave us His Son, who yielded His life and atonement for sin, and opened the life gate that all may go in. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory. Great things He hath done. Great things He hath taught us. Great things He hath done. And greater rejoicing through Jesus the Son. But purer and higher and greater will be our wonder, our transport, when Jesus we see. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory. Great things He hath done. The invitation song's going to be 395.
Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight, Father. We come before you, study your word again. Father, we ask you to be with us, be with those that are sick. Father, we ask you to watch over, protect us. We ask you to be with our country, be with our leaders. We ask you, they will look to you for guidance. Father, we ask you to be with our community, be with our children, protect them. Father, most of all, we ask you to forgive us. We thank you, Father, for your Son Jesus, the sacrifice He made, for the ability to be here tonight, to hear more about your word, Father, and the blessings that you give us, Father. We thank you for all you've done. We ask you to be with us through this hour of study. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Out of the book of 2 Samuel as well. So if you have like a little marker or something and you want to mark 2 Samuel 18, then that will be great as well. But we'll start out in Psalm 13 before we move over to 2 Samuel. As I'm excited about this mainly because this is a question that you can't really ask when you're doing discussion class over your own sermon. It doesn't feel right to get up on Sunday night and say, so everyone tell me, what's one life-changing point that you really feel like came out of that sermon from earlier today? Tell me, what'd you really like? So since I can't normally do that for myself, I'd feel weird if I got up and asked that question. I can do that for Ethan though, because there were a few different things that I really liked, that I really took from some points that he made. We'll open up the floor by asking y'all, just based on maybe what you have written down or what you remember, what was one point or a few different points from the sermon this morning that really stuck with you? Because you remember we were in Psalm 13 looking at David and looking at God's relationship with one another. One of the things that I saw that I liked was the phrase that he used when he said that David had in this moment was becoming truly vulnerable with God in the aspect of he wasn't allowing his prayer, and he wasn't allowing his cry out to God to be he didn't make it what he thought God wanted to hear. Instead, he made it what he truly meant. He made it what he was truly experiencing. And Ethan kind of summarized that by saying that in Psalm 13, David is absolutely vulnerable before God. And so that was something that I really pulled from seeing. Anybody else have any other thoughts when it came to what we studied this morning in Psalm 13? Mm. Amen. And when it comes to us making requests of God, when it comes to the things that we want or the things that we desire, we live in such an instant gratification kind of culture. Everything that I want can come to me instantly, and I can pay my $7 a month to make sure that Amazon gets it to me in 2 days. And if I don't want to wait that long, I can make sure to download whatever it is over the internet and have it in 2 minutes and everything, right? And I mean, I'm as a big a part of that as anybody. I have an Amazon Prime account. I like being able to buy something and have it shipped to me in 2 days, don't y'all? But at the same time, what that can do spiritually is the problems that can create is it almost leaves us with that being our standard. And when that becomes our standard for God, who actually in our morning class, beginning our study, working through Crazy Love, we talked about how eternal God is, how timeless God is, that He doesn't work within the same time frame, within the same bounds that we do. And so for this, in this instance specifically, in Psalm 13, you have David that is saying, Lord, it's been too long. It's been too many days. It's been too many weeks. It's been too many years. And he's speaking to a God where God is 1,000 years is 1 day, and 1 day is 1,000 years, right? And so when we talk about God's timeline compared to our timeline, it can be pretty humbling, I guess, when we're experiencing things like David is asking those "Oh, how long, Lord?" questions. We have to, I guess, see and realize He does have a timeline. He does have a plan, and through humility, we can find that it doesn't always line up with mine, and that's okay. It's probably better that it's on His timeline than if it's on mine. Any other thoughts? That was a great one. Yeah, a common theme being patience. And we see patience is something that somehow, if we really think about it, makes its way into every significant Bible character from the beginning to the end. I mean, look at Abraham, and he didn't want to wait for Isaac to come, so he took matters into his own hands with Ishmael. You look at different individuals like Moses as they're wandering around in the wilderness. You see the entire nation of Israel doing what? Growing impatient. And that theme carries through as the people of Israel go into the book of Judges. Remember, in all those years, they're crying out and saying, God, where are you at? Come deliver us. God, why haven't you come in? Why haven't you saved me yet? And they're saying, why haven't we progressed to be like all these other kingdoms that have kings, and we only have these judges? And it carries on through, and what God is trying, for what it seems to me at least, from the beginning of Scripture to the end of Scripture, He's trying to groom His people to see and experience situations like He does, and to groom His people to realize, okay, there is something that can come out of this situation when I'm in an "oh, how long, Lord" moment. There is something that God can do within this. There's something He can work within this. And for us, it might be just a matter of sitting tight in a few ways and letting if it's a situation that would break somebody or crumble somebody that's within the world, it doesn't faze us in the same way, because we know that God has a plan and we know He has a timeline, which fits right in with what Ethan was saying when it came to patience. Any other thoughts? Mm, yeah, yeah. That was a big point, and it was one that really made me think. That was probably the point that made me think the most, when he was speaking this morning. And the process that I walked through, was he put it up on the PowerPoint screen, and it said our feelings can change our reality. And the first thought, just initially, just walking you through my mental spiritual process, the first thought, that came to my mind, is I guess the thought of, wait, what I feel about something doesn't change what's actually happening. What I feel about something doesn't actually change what's true or what's false. The way that what I feel about something isn't necessarily what's always truth. But then I looked at it again, and then I reread it a little bit closer, and it didn't necessarily say our feelings change reality. It said our feelings can change our reality. And when I think about it that way, I realize that the way that I'm feeling about a situation, and the way that I'm experiencing a situation, thinking about a situation, can truly define the terms of what I'm going through. Because if I'm in an "oh how long, Lord" moment like David was, and I'm crying out and asking, "Lord, will you forget me forever?" That is kind of like an impatient approach. And for David, that's very real, and that's truly his reality. But it goes to show that we see it within our own brothers and sisters at times. I know there are a lot of people that worship here that have been through a lot of very difficult things, very trying things, and they from what we know of them, they didn't have this same moment that David did. Somebody could walk through the exact same trial, and somebody could walk through the exact same fire and have even a stronger faith for it. They don't cry out asking, "Oh Lord, how long have you forgotten me?" Instead, they have this just spiritually mature, patient demeanor of God has a timing, God has a plan. It's not my place to make demands or call Him on it. It's my place to find His will, to find His opportunities, to find His comfort in it, and be patient. And so when I looked at it a little bit further, I saw definitely where he was coming from. That even though my initial thought was, our feeling, the way I feel about something doesn't necessarily always change the reality itself. Well, that might be true. What's also true is that for me, when I'm experiencing something, especially something as trying as Psalm 13, the way that I approach it, the way I feel about it, can change my own reality for myself, between handling it like David did in the first couple of verses, or maybe handling it like some brothers and sisters that we've seen that have been just tried by fire and had a strong faith all throughout it. Any other thoughts? Have been great so far. We see some significant, spiritually impactful points that Ethan made out of Psalm 13 this morning. One more thing that I did notice when we start walking through the end of the chapter, which it's ironic, it's a six verse chapter, but nonetheless, the end of the chapter, I noticed that he pointed out in verses 3 as well as verses 4 that David makes this transition from asking God, "Oh, how long?" from asking God, and when are you going to forget me forever? And in that verse 3, he starts beginning to make his own demands. And I can relate with that at different times when we've been going through something, going through a struggle or a trial long enough. It can become very easy. It can become easy to start making demands of God and saying, "Consider and answer me." If it's saying the least you could, even if it's not the answer I want to hear, at least give me some kind of answer, God. And so that kind of connects back to that vulnerable point in seeing that David, he really I guess shows us a mirror in a lot of ways, or showed me a mirror in a lot of ways with Psalm 13. Because when things aren't going well, I reach out and I almost I get a little bit too big in making demands of a God that I have no right making demands from. But anyway, did anyone have anything else to go with that, or also any questions from this morning? Any questions that might have arisen, or comments or thoughts? And so we notice as we look at Psalm 13, the main thing that I guess he was trying to get us to pull from that is having a confidence in God over a fear of the situation itself. And that's kind of the choice that he left us with at the very end of everything was, are we going to choose fear of a situation, or fear of what we're struggling with, or fear of what we're going through, or are we going to place our confidence in the Lord, which seems to be in verses 5 and 6. That's kind of the transition that David made, which is also very similar to what I've experienced in my own life. I don't know about y'all, but whenever going through something tough, I can be very flighty, right? In one moment, I am in this almost, and I use this term very, very carefully, very, very metaphorically, not trying to be offensive in any way, but I become very bipolar in a lot of ways. In that one moment, it's, oh God, how long is this going to happen? The end of the world. This very, very sorrowful, very depressive state. Then 2 verses later, it's now, God, you haven't answered me, and now I'm frustrated at you. Now I'm mad at you because you haven't given me what I wanted. You hadn't given me. I prayed to you a good 20 minutes ago, and you haven't fixed it yet, right? And so now I'm angry, and now I'm demanding answers. And then 2 verses later, here I am flipping another switch, and I find myself having a renewed confidence in God, in His steadfast love, in His deliverance. And so that's something I definitely see. And it all ends, and notice how it's almost kind of funny. Verse 6 ends, and I will sing to the Lord because He has dealt bountiful with me. And just a few verses ago, his whole world was falling apart, and he was frustrated at God for it, and frustrated at God for not giving an answer. So I, in the grand scheme of Psalm 13, there are a lot of things I pulled from it that I really grew, I guess, from spending some time in it this morning. Before we move on, did anyone have any other comments or questions or thoughts? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's and what the point Philip was making is, if you weren't able to hear, that there's somebody very real, and there's somebody real genuine behind each of those feltboard characters that we remember from growing up. Like there is a real person behind these giants, because David is literally the man after God's own heart. Like David is the guy. David is the pinnacle of the Old Testament. Like Jesus is connected to who? King David. Like they are made out to be the Old Testament and New Testament equivalent of one another. Like David is the one, when we look at God's promise to Israel in the book of Judges, when he tells them that they're going to have their own land, when he tells them they're going to be this kingdom that he's going to establish, who brings all of that into fruition? David. And not all of those pagan nations aren't cast out of the land of Israel until David does it. And so when we see that, like this is God's guy throughout the Old Testament. If you want to pick one, not that God picks favorites, but if he's picking favorites, it's David. His resume's stacked high and above everyone else. And this guy that wrote all these psalms, This guy that was king of Israel, this guy that fulfilled God's will, has just as many ups and downs in his relationship with God as you and I or anyone else does. And so that's incredibly, it's encouraging, it's humbling. It helps me to see that, the faith that we sometimes put beyond ourselves. We sometimes look at these biblical characters and put a certain level of faith beyond ourselves and say, I can't achieve that, I can't attain that. It's just not true. David stands in defiance of it because he was just like us, and we see how close he and God were, and that's pretty incredible. Any others? All right, question number 2. This one, it will be pretty good if you have any interest in any kind of music. I'll ask, and there's multiple different reasons, not a wrong answer, but why do people write songs and or poems? And I promise we're going somewhere with that. What are some reasons? What are some reasons why people would write a song or write a poem? Okay, express their feelings. What else? Past experiences. Okay, a terrible tragedy that has happened. Anything else? Yeah, telling a story. Any others? Okay, uplifting people. We've seen a lot of those that have come out in the last year. Yeah. Expression. So we have some of those that are like the tragedies or bad past experiences, but then we also have people that will write songs, write poems out of expressing joy. Any others? Man, they're in love. Don't you love you a good old love song, right? So I'll ask this question: can you think of? And we'll walk back through some of these that we've just listed, right? Because I know that it's this way in our culture. It was this way in David's culture. That songs were a big part of their culture. So with that in mind, can you think of? And granted, it can be a song from forever ago that I've never heard of. But can you think of a song that talks about? We'll start with one of the easy ones. A song that's uplifting. What's a song that you consider to be uplifting to you? And it doesn't have to be a hymn. I'm not saying it can't be a hymn, but I'm broadening it up. Yep. Don't worry, be happy. You want to talk about a song that was written for the sake of joy, right? That's a great one. Okay, what about a song that tells a story? Anyone know of a song that tells a story? Okay, the coat of many colors. And that's the one I don't know personally, but I'm sure others do, and that's okay. How about one that expresses some kind of past experience, maybe some kind of tragedy? Okay, yeah. Where were you when the world stopped turning? Then we walk through. We've got uplifting, we've had joy, we had tell a story, terrible tragedy. And past experiences, what we expressing ourselves, and then there was one more, and I lost it. But oh yeah, love song. Thanks, Philip, reminding me. All right, what's your love song? What's your go-to love song? Hey, Valentine's Day is like a couple of weeks, so I hope that you guys have them pegged down. Ring of Fire. Okay, all right, Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash. That is it. That is the go-to love song. I love it. Done. Okay. I'm gonna make sure to play that on Valentine's Day. That's true. Okay. not that far off. Now, when we think about the purpose behind each song that is written, I want you to realize that for the most part, with exception of some of the just absolute trash that is written today, with the exception of that, most everything else that's real music is written with some kind of purpose, and it's written with some kind of intention. They sat down and there was something behind it. There was something that influenced it. There's something that impacted it. There's something in there that made a difference, I guess, in the life of the person that was writing that song or writing that poem. And so when we look at David's own life and we look at some of the things that David has gone through, and I'll be honest with you, there are scholars that have sat down and tried to go through every one of David's psalms and date them and say, well, this psalm has to specifically connect with this event in his life, and this song has to specifically connect there's a handful that we can say with confidence, like Psalm 51, creating me a clean heart, O God, is without a shadow of a doubt connected to when David had looked at Bathsheba and he realized that he had done messed up. And there are a few others like that, but for the most part, it would be a stretch to say for that we know for sure which psalm, every single psalm that's connected to every single event in David's life. But on a more just broad, more open, up and down, kind of just looking at the ups and downs of David's life, we can see that there's probably more than one time that David felt the way that he felt in Psalm 13. There's probably more than one event that took place that made him experience this God, how long are you going to leave me here kind of moment. And so based on what we read in Psalm 13, what type of things, what kind of things might have happened in David's life to bring him to write this psalm? What do you think? Because in all reality, there's not a definite answer of exactly what happened, so there can't really be a wrong answer to this question. This is like the best of both worlds. There's no wrong answer. But what might have taken place in David's life to give him the reason or to give him the motivation for writing the 13th Psalm? Okay, yeah. So David, being in the position and the place of a king, was very used to kind of having control, right? We can be control freaks for our own lives sometime, can't we? And so he had become so used to that and so accustomed to that that maybe a branch broke that he was standing on. Maybe something gave way, and he was completely taken out of control of the things he was experiencing, of the things that were happening to him. And so instead of feeling high on the hill, instead of that kingly I'm in control of things, he instead experienced what it was like, I guess, to realize and turn everything back over and see that I haven't really been in control all along. That maybe there is someone greater pulling the strings than just me, myself, King David. Any other thoughts? What might have been going on? What might have been happening in David's life for him to write Psalm 13? And again, these are hypotheticals. It doesn't have to be a specific event in his life. It can be, but what might have happened or what might he have experienced? Okay, most definitely. It could have been in that time when he was running from Saul. And you think about it. Just be in David's shoes for just a minute. Somebody that he didn't go looking to be anointed. It wasn't like they went out and posted king auditions, king tryouts. Everybody come and give your best, most God glorifying performance or speech, and we'll pick the best king. That God went after him. God went looking for him. And we remember from the unexpected package, right, that he was the unexpected king, because when all Jesse's boys were called together, which one did he leave at home? He left his own son at home, right? He left David at home, and yet he was the one that was chosen. And so imagine going through all of that whirlwind and thinking, what in the world is God going to want from me out of all this? But then getting into the palace, getting into that position, and then having this growing hatred fester with Saul, and so much that Saul is after him, wanting to kill him, so much that David, luckily he had a close friend, Jonathan, that gave him a little bit of a warning so he could flee. But imagine being on the run for your life and thinking, God, you're the one that brought me here. Like this was your plan. This wasn't mine, and now I'm over here having to run for my life. So seeing that the way all of that played out, I know that me myself personally, that I'd kind of struggle with that, of thinking, how long, oh Lord, how long am I supposed to keep running? How long is Saul going to keep trying to take my own life from me? How long, you know? So with that being another good one, we're going to go and check one out in 2 Samuel 18. And this is a little bit later in David's life. So he's already been king for a while. But what we know is that David had quite a few sons. One of them that he seemed to have a few problems out of was named Absalom. Absalom was his third son. And so we're about to read the account of kind of what takes place, what transpires between Absalom and David. Absalom has a tendency to kind of be a little bit power hungry. And so he chases after to kind of take some of the power that his father has. And we'll read verses 6 through 18 to see how that plays out. Because eventually David and Absalom, even though we can see David didn't really want to, David and Absalom had to go toe-to-toe. They had to go into battle against one another. And so verse 6 says, "So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the loss there was great on that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword. And Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of an oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, and he was suspended between heaven and earth, while the mule was under him. And it went on, verse 10. And a certain man saw it and told Joab, Behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Joab said to the man who told him, What you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there on the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, Even if I had felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I wouldn't reach out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and the Abishai and Attai, for my sake protect the young man Absalom. And on the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you. And he took 3 javelins in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him, and he killed him. All right, so a recap of what has just happened, what we've just read. You have this battle that is taking place. It's taking place in the forest of Ephraim. You have Absalom and all of his men, and then you have all the men that evidently David was not there, but he sent out his own men into battle. And what we're about to read later, it's most likely has something to do with the fact that David, it deeply pained him in his older age to see his son revolting like this. It deeply pained him to have to go into battle against his own flesh and blood. Now, they're in the middle of battle, in the middle of the forest. Absalom is riding on a donkey, and then all of a sudden he gets caught. His hair gets caught in this branch. The mule keeps going, and he stops. Now, this could be taken a few different ways. One interpretation is that this is a story that teaches of all the dangers of men having long hair. But that's not really it. That was supposed to be a bad joke. But what took place is, as he's hanging here and as he's suspended here by his own luscious locks, there are a few men that have been sent out, servants of David, that notice it, and they go and they tell Joab, and Joab's response is, wait, Absalom, the guy that has started all this, the guy that has taken the first punch, taken the first strike, he is the instigator of this conflict, trying to take power from the king. You saw him just hanging in a tree, completely helpless, completely defenseless, and I'm just imagining to myself that his hair is so long that he can't reach the branch, but I don't know that for a fact. And you see him hanging here, and you don't do anything. And their response was, the king told us, David told us from the very beginning, go into battle and win the battle, but don't touch my son, and don't touch Absalom. And that, we talked about that whole David being the man after God's own heart, we see God's heart within what David is doing, because he's saying, extinguish the conflict. extinguish the bad, get rid of the uprising, but protect my son, protect my child in the same way. And so we could go pretty deep into all the ways that connects with how God operates. Extinguish evil, abhor evil, get rid of evil, destroy evil, but protect my child, protect my son. And so within that, we find that Joab is saying, just absolutely astonished. You saw him up in this tree and you didn't do anything about it. And so he goes and he takes a couple javelins. He kills him. He has his armor bearers bring him on down. And eventually they take him and bury him. Now, what we find is that we see David's reaction to all of this. And this is where this is going to begin to tie into a situation. I'm not saying it's explicitly that 2 Samuel 18 definitely connects to Psalm 30. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying this is the type of situation that would bring out David's mourning, that would bring out David asking God, why has this happened? And so let's read down in verses 33 through chapter 19, verse 4. And if you have little headings, you see that it's called, so we start in a section called David's Grief. And so it says, and the king was deeply moved after he was told all these things. And imagine, look up in verse 31, somebody coming in and sticking their foot in their mouth real bad. Because in verse 31, his servant walks in and says, good news for my lord the king, for the Lord has delivered you on this day from the hand of all those who rose up against you. And then the very first question David asks is, how's my son? And so then he had to tell him the truth. And that was the moment that the servant stuck his foot in his mouth, because David is not responding as if he has heard good news. He is responding as if he's heard the worst news he ever heard. And so verse 33, and the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son. And he's wailing that he would have much rather have given his own life than lose his sons. And then chapter 4, verse 1 through 4, we see that Joab kind of helps to pull David out of this. It was told to Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard that day the king is grieving for his son, and the people stole into the city that day as people steal in who are ashamed when they flee in battle. And the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. And so what's taking place is, as you can imagine, very, very normal, very typical response. When you win a battle, when you win a war, you rejoice, as any of us would logically conclude you do. But then after David's told that his son has died, he goes into mourning. And as the king, as the leader, all of the people that are respectful of him, fearful of him, reverent of him, and his position that God has put him in, also follow suit. And so you have all these people that have to flip the switch, that go from, this is incredible, we're rejoicing, we just won the war, into, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. And it even said that people were running into their own homes as if somebody that was ashamed. So imagine people just running around with their heads down, trying to get it indoors as quickly as possible. They're mourning over the king's son's death. They're mourning over Absalom's death because David is mourning. And so he seems to be going through a pretty rough time, as we see that he's covering his face, crying out with a loud voice, and he has this same the same phrase, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. And that's all that he can muster out. And so he's going through something. And I guess we'll ask, and kind of tie it into our own lives maybe, what are some of the results when we're going through a rough point in life? What are some of the things that happen when we're in a 2 Samuel 18, Psalm 13 kind of spot like David was? Some of the results, some of the things that we see when within our own lives, when we're going through these struggles, maybe when we're going through mourning or grief, when we're going through questioning God or being angry with God, what all is happening? Yeah, one of the first things we want to ask God why, because you have David that knows all good and well that God has a hand in what happens. You have David that knows good and well that God is the one that gave him the victory that day. And so he's asking God, well, if I would have rather given my own life, why did you choose to take Absalom's, to allow Absalom's life to be taken? What are some other things we see when we're going through a rough point in life? I'll take the softball. I mean, the easiest one would be the grief and the mourning process when we go through tough points, and that was kind of, I guess, last September, October, whenever it was that we kind of had that 3-part Sunday study through grief, in seeing that it's not just, grief isn't just something that you experience when you lose a loved one, even though it's very real then. Grief is something that we go through with loss. It's something that we go through in tough points of life, and it's the human way, and it's the human process of trying to wrap our mind around it and trying to understand why. And a lot of times that leads us to asking God a whole lot of questions, and a lot of times it leads us to work through that in a state of mourning, and that's part of it. And we can, we put on the smile and still go about our day. We fulfill our responsibilities. We still go to church, but we might be working through something pretty deep. Might be working through something pretty hurtful. Anything else that we see when we're going through a patch in life like what David's experiencing? Any thoughts that go along with that? Mm. That is a Yeah, that's a great point. That David right here is in the middle of a no-win situation, because if he squashes his son, ends his son's life, that ends the uprising, but at the same time he's lost his son. And we flip the coin over to the other side, and we see if he doesn't squash the uprising, he hands over everything to his son, who isn't God's chosen ruler. That's not God's chosen successor for him. We know that's Solomon. And so it's either lose his son, squash the uprising, defy his son, or lose his position, defy his God. And so obviously, at the end of the day, doing what he did by sending everyone out into battle was the right decision. It was maintaining God's leader, and it wasn't necessarily this selfish, I'm trying to keep my power, but he was who God has chosen, and Absalom is not who God has chosen as his successor. So he's in the middle of this choice, this no-win situation, and a lot of times we can experience grief when we ourselves we feel like we're in a no-win situation, where I look and I see that whatever it is, I'm sure we've been in those spots before, where I look at option number 1 and its results, and I don't like those. Option number 2 and its results, and I don't like those. But eventually, I'm going to have to choose one of the two. Eventually, time's going to run out. I'm going to have to make a choice between one of these two. And so when we're in those points in life, it can lead us to having a Psalm 13 moment with God of I'm over here trying to do right, God. Why have I ended up in this situation, having to make this decision that I don't want to make? And so that's very real. That's very applicable. Any other thoughts when it comes to that? Alrighty, then we'll move to this very last question. And what I want us to see is that this kind of wraps up with Joab being this slightly a voice of reason. Your heading might say that Joab rebukes David, but he's just going in and he's trying to help David make sense of the situation. And so here's what he says in verses 5 through 7. Then Joab came into the house of the king and said, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who have this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and your concubines, because you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. For you have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, you would be pleased." And then he goes on to say in verse 7, "Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night. and this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. And then the king arose and took his seat at the gate, and the people were all told, behold, the king is sitting at the gate, and all the people came before the king. Now, what Joab has just done right here is by going to David and saying, look at the example you're setting for all the people that just risked their lives going into battle for you. They've just won, they've just conquered, and you're telling them all to hide their faces and go and mourn. He said, you're despising the people that are in your corner. He said, you're hating the people that love you and shedding tears, loving over the people that were seeking to bring an end to you, David. Absalom was seeking to take your throne. They were seeking to take your sons, your daughters' lives, even your own life, King. And you're mourning over, I know he's your son, but you're mourning over the bad guy here. And so Joab was kind of this voice of reason that brought David out of his Psalm 13 moment, because he's sitting here, he's in his mourning, my son Absalom, oh my son, and obviously we see that that Joab has come in to shed some light on the situation and show him how, even he said, David, I see what you're going through, but look at how this looks to all of these people that were your servants. Look at how this looks to all these people that went out and just risked their lives for you. So what are some thoughts from either your own thoughts or thoughts from the sermon this morning that can help us when we're in the middle of a Psalm 13 moment, when we're in the middle of either questioning God or being angry with God, or the my son Absalom, oh my son kind of moment of, God, why have I been put in this position, or why have I had to do this? When we're going through that, what are some things that we can keep in mind to kind of be our Joab, or to be our voice of reason? Mm. And so one of the things that Ethan said this morning was that not knowing is one of the hardest parts of trusting. And so when we realize that if we did know and if we did have guarantees, that would negate trust, that would negate faith, that would negate all of it. If I had all of these answers and all of these guarantees up front, right? Hebrews 1:3, faith is the things not seen. And so when we realize the essence of what trust truly is, that can be a great reminder. That can be a great Joab for us to say, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm going through, but my trust in God can make a huge difference in that. I love that. Any other thoughts? Any other Joabs, metaphorically? When I look back at Ethan's main 3 points, I guess, that come out of verses 5 through 6, I think that seeing God's steadfast love and His deliverance is a big one for me, looking backward and going forward, because that was out of verses 5 and 6. Trusting God's steadfast love, knowing God delivered us, and the Lord has dealt bountifully with us, which if you notice, those are all verbatim out of verses 5 and 6 is what he pulled. And so when we're going through moments like that, I think some of the greatest things to see is how God's dealt with us in the past, because God isn't necessarily just asking for blind trust or blind faith. He's asking for trust and faith based on who He's been in the past and based on what He's done for us, in us, through us in the past. And so that's a good one for me, at least, to keep in mind. Any other thoughts? All right, wonderful. As we wrap everything up, you might be going through a Psalm 13 kind of moment in life right now, and don't think that you're going through it alone. That's not the purpose of the church. And so the way that you can might be able to, I guess, not go through that alone, experience that with brothers and sisters, is we don't know unless you tell us. We don't know unless you ask for help. We don't know unless you ask for prayers. So if you have any need like that, we'd love to pray for you. If you have any need when it comes to salvation, just come talk to me, and we'll open up some scripture. So if you have either of those, make it known as we stand and as we sing.